we're here today to talk about cybersecurity, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and we've got a fantastic panel for you. I'm also extremely conscious, and I always seem to end up in this slot, I'm not sure why, that I am the only thing standing between you and lunch. So I'm going to be very quick. Now, just a quick housekeeping note to say that you do have, hopefully you've all downloaded the app, which is essential if you want to ask questions. And I am very happy to, we've already got a question. Wow, that was quick. I'm very happy to take questions during the discussion. So please do ask them, and I will try and inject them into our conversation. But can I please invite the speakers? Fantastic lineup of speakers that we've got joining us today. And I think you're sitting, hopefully, in. Thanks. Great. So, first of all, let me just say a few words about this topic, which I have written a bit about for the FT. In January of this year, the head of the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre warned that a major cyber attack on the UK is a matter of when, not if. And in the financial services sector, the threat of compromised data or crippled infrastructure would affect customers and businesses on a national and international scale. It is genuinely, and I know this because I've spoken to a lot of the senior bankers in this country and other countries, it is top of the boardroom agenda because the threat is so existential for our financial services industry. And as our world becomes more connected and digitized, financial services providers are trying to protect themselves and our data. But do they have the agility and know-how to defend against attacks, or are specialized cyber startups a better fit? And will the cyber threat drive collaborations at an industry, national, and international level? And can the UK present a united front and lead the way? I mean, just a quick anecdote about cybersecurity. I was in Davos earlier this year, and I heard the chairman of A.P. Moller-Maersk, the world's biggest container shipping company, who talked about the cyber attack on his company last year, which ended up causing the company to shut down its IT systems for 10 days in a row, and ended up costing $300 million. Now, that was pretty damaging. They managed to keep the ships going around the world without an IT system for 10 days. It's pretty extraordinary to do that. But he said in Davos earlier this year, he said, can you imagine if that had been a bank, what would have happened if a bank had to take down its IT systems for 10 days? How damaging to confidence that could have been, potential of a bank run, panic and fear spreading through the system. So, and it's not as if we haven't already seen examples of hackers getting into the financial system. I mean, just to mention a few, there's the Equifax hack, which was pretty terrifying. JP Morgan had data on thousands of its clients stolen by hackers. And of course, there was the hack into the Bangladesh Central Bank 2 years ago, where hackers tried to steal $1 billion. They ended up getting a much less than that, but still close to $100 million was stolen via the SWIFT messaging network. Right, we're going to kick off, before I introduce our panelists, actually, let me introduce our panelists, because I think they are leaders in their field and a really good range of people we've got here as well. So firstly, to my left is Andersen Cheng, who's Chief Executive of Post Quantum. And that's a cybersecurity company that was founded in 2009 to develop a system that was proofed against hacking by a quantum computer. Before this, Andersen was COO of Carlyle Europe's European Venture Fund and a founding member of JP Morgan Chase's e-finance unit. To his left, we have Andy Bate, who is Executive Director for Europe, for the UK and Europe at the Global Cyber Alliance, which is which was set up by the New York County District Attorney, the City of London Police, and the Center for Internet Security to help institutions coordinate their defenses against cyber attacks. And he's got more than 25 experience at various technology companies, most recently at Verizon. To his left is Nigel Houlden, who is the head of technology policy at the Information Commissioner's Office, having spent over 30 years in technology, working in various sectors of government and industry, and also having been a senior lecturer in computing. To his left is Ruth Davis, head of commercial strategy and public policy at BT Security. She leads BT's engagement on cybersecurity with politicians and officials to make sure that the UK and EU cybersecurity policy benefits from BT's decades of experience. And finally, to the far left, Stuart Bertram, Director of Threat Intelligence and Professional Services at Digital Shadows, which advises companies on their digital footprint and the profile of their attackers. Stuart's had a long career at threat intelligence dating back to 2009 and technical intelligence dating back further than that. Right, we're going to start off by asking you to tell us what you think, and we've got some questions to ask you. So please use your app, I think, to answer these questions, get us started. If a murderer lived next door, you would call the police, but if a cyber criminal lived next door, would you still call the police? Go. Is the right answer. Oh, 22% say no. That's interesting. No, 16% say no. All right. So 1 in 8 say no. They wouldn't. Cyber criminals living next door is just fine by them. That's interesting. Do you think public-private partnerships are a complete failure? Yeah. All right. Roughly 1/3 say yes. Oh no, 1/4 say yes. 3/4 say no. Okay, so pretty supportive of public-private partnerships. That's good news. And finally, what is the final question? Would a united front increase our overall security or just make us a bigger target? Yes or no? United front. Does it help, or does it just make us a more bigger, juicier target? Okay, I think that means yes, it would help, rather than yes, it's a bigger target. I'm not really sure. The question isn't really a yes or no, is it? I didn't write these questions, sort of disowning them completely. But well done for answering a question when it wasn't clear how to answer it. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to start with you guys. I mean, do feel free to respond to that. I think that was pretty interesting. There's quite a lot of support for public-private partnerships there. That is what we're here mainly to discuss, which is collaboration. There is quite a lot of collaboration on cybersecurity, but maybe if I could ask Andersen, if you could talk about your view from the private sector, and you're advising a lot of companies on this. I mean, how do you see collaboration working? Because we were talking before we came in, and you were saying that some of the institutions aren't quite getting it right yet, that have been set up to coordinate. And what do you think how do you think we're doing? Are we doing out of 10? What kind of mark would you give us?
I would say around 4.
Yeah, okay. Why is that?
Well, if you're just talking about public-private partnership, in cybersecurity, it used to be dominated by a few large primes, what we call primes in the defense world, and then they would go to subcontractors for real expertise, and then they win all the government contracts. But the landscape is changing now because the mantra of you don't get fired for buying IBM has been very true in the government world, not just in the UK, but globally. But I think with the launch of the NCSC, the civilian-facing branch of GCHQ, and I deal with both of them, I think when it started, it was more like a showcase, but I think there's a newfound urgency in the last 6 to 9 months. So when people talk to us from those 2 departments, I could tell there's now a change in there. They know they can no longer do it on their own. They need to partner with smaller enterprises and also to be more customer friendly. So it's very interesting when that first question was whether you would call the police if there's a cyber criminal next door. My answer is I don't know, because it depends on the government guideline, and they haven't been very clear. Like if there's a breach, is there a particular call tree that you should go to? Because if it's a murder, you have to stop the guy immediately. If it's a cyber criminal, you probably don't want to, because you get a lot more information by going through their web quietly. So that's how I would see it. Yeah,
okay. If I could put the same question perhaps to somebody more on the public sector side, and ask Nigel, for you to tell us how you think, from your point of view, at the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, what's your view of how collaboration and cooperation is going at the moment? Are we doing enough?
I don't think we're doing enough. I think we could do plenty more. I think some of the biggest problem is people are very nervous when it comes to public-private sector, because particularly with things like GDPR looming, I think people get very nervous when they start hearing things like £17 million fines. And it's really a case of, we at the ICO, we're quite happy with public-private partnerships. What we want to see, and what we want to see develop from that, is thinking about, obviously we're coming from a personal data point of view, but obviously cybersecurity falls all over that as well, is think about your privacy to begin with. Don't sort of think about it afterwards. Don't develop the system, don't do all the hard work first and then think, oh yeah, but we better make this secure. I think if you think the other way around and start at the very beginning and think, okay, we need to make whatever we do secure and move forward, it doesn't really matter who you partner with then. As long as they've got the same values and working to the same standards as you are, it should be absolutely fine. And that's what we want to see from the ICO's point of view. We want to see you taking privacy by design very seriously and putting it at the heart of everything you do. That, in turn, then should lead to very good cybersecurity. So I think from our point of view, we come from a, yes, we want you to work together, listening to Liam earlier on. Yes, we want the UK open for business. We're not the Department of No. We're not, the bogeyman. What we want you to do is be responsible. When you're looking at people's private data and you're moving it around in collaboration, just make sure you've got the proper policies, procedures in place, and that you're being careful and cautious with UK citizens, which applies to you as well. These are your rights as well, don't forget. This is not just, something that belongs to somebody else. You, as every individual in this country, have these rights. And if you're thinking of putting something together, just think how you'd want your personal data or your family's personal data used. And I think that gives us a solid basis to move forward.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Maybe Ruth, as someone who heads up commercial strategy and public policy at a big telco like BT, you can talk about your view of whether within the private sector, are we sharing enough threat intelligence? And also, are you getting enough collaboration and cooperation from regulators and also law enforcement agencies?
Sure. So I think public-private partnership is something that BT's been involved in for decades, long before cybersecurity started getting time on stages at conferences. So we helped to found the information exchanges that was run out of what was then the Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure. We were a founding member of the CISP, the Cyber Information Sharing Platform, which is a joint industry government sort of intelligence forum and has a fusion cell of analysts, both from a number from BT and other private sector organisations and government analysts as well. And most recently, we work with the National Cybersecurity Centre. You may have seen, I think the FT actually ran a piece a couple of weeks ago about a new programme called Active Cyber Defence. The NCSC is running with telcos like ourselves to help harden the infrastructure of the internet against the sort of commodity attacks that affect the majority of sort of citizens in the UK. So we've been quite central to the public-private partnership work, both in the UK and abroad. We also are the first CSP to sign an intelligence sharing agreement with Interpol. Is it perfect? No, definitely not. But I think we have made some fantastic steps forward that we wouldn't have done without working in partnership. So, for example, the NCSC's Active Cyber Defence Programme took down 120,000 fraudulent websites in the last year. We've just launched, as part of that programme, the malware information sharing platform, where we share information about malicious websites and domains with other ISPs. We've sort of identified and shared over 200,000 of those with our other ISPs in the last month, so that they can then act and block those. So I think, if you have good, tangible outcomes that everybody's working towards, I think you certainly will see a better sum of our parts through a public-private partnership can be more effective than not.
Okay. Stuart, I just want to bring you in here. In preparation for this, you took a devil's advocate position. I'm going to invite you to do the same. Tell us why you think all this motherhood and apple pie about collaboration might be a little bit off beam.
Yeah, so it is a devil's advocate position I am taking, and they are my own opinions, not Digital Shadow's opinions. I think when it comes down to public-private partnership, that there is my own opinion that it does make me quite nervous, a part of the way that can be framed and that can be construed from the threat perspective, actually the threat actor base. So we have seen cyber go from, in 2009 when I started working in it, to a fringe thing, to actually now it's a core thing. It's getting conference, it's getting agenda. It's also perceived as a systemic risk, and you, in your own kind of opening narrative, talked about the existential threat of cyber and sort of debating that in those kind of ways. And the actors becoming involved in that are becoming exposed to more risk by that kind of capability. And I think it's very important to look at how private sector companies and the way they engage with the public sector is perceived by the threat, but without necessarily the protection that you would receive in the public sector. So there are nation states that have said, hold on, you're accusing us of engaging with proxy forces, and yet you're using these private companies as essentially proxies yourself. And I felt this quite keenly when I've been doing kind of response cases in quite risky jurisdictions and feeling very exposed as an individual versus the protection I would have received if I'd been working for the British military or something in those kind of ways. I think it's important to acknowledge this because the geopolitical context is fundamentally changing around cyber, with an elevation of cyber and cyber threat perception. I think also as well, we talk about the threat as an amorphous group. They're fundamentally not. They're very different. And to the question, would I report a cyber criminal next door? If it was a paedophile, absolutely. If it was a hacker, no, a hacktivist, no, I wouldn't bother. And I think that nuance is where we kind of need to get to. I think, finally, there is an analogy between the coalition of the willing and the coalition of the billing argument that we had in physical security post 9/11 that you can apply to cybersecurity as well.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean the coalition of the willing, coalition of the billing. So post 9/11 physical security, you saw mass uptake of private security. That could be viewed in two ways, as kind of the rise of mercenaries and proxy forces and those kind of ways. Also, it could be looking at, you could frame it as outsourcing within places like Iraq and these kind of areas as well to allow the public sector to focus on this. I think the key thing with cyber is, cyber response can be defensive or offensive in the way that it does what it does. And this is the separation between a guard and a policeman. So, if you're looking at defensive cybersecurity, I see that's my job. I see my job as a guard. So I'm there guarding that one piece of physical infrastructure. It's not my job to chase after criminals.
But offensive cybersecurity in the private sector isn't legal, is it? You can't go and attack, counter-attack.
You can't at the moment, absolutely not. And
you have to leave that to the...
Yeah, precisely. But then what is attack? then, you know, to be honest, I don't subscribe to the idea that a hack can only be violent. If you're, say, identifying cyber criminals and you're sharing that with law enforcement and those kind of areas as well, and that's your specific business model to do so, I think that would be construed as pretty aggressive kind of action from a private sector organisation, hence opening them up to risk. So I suppose, for me, it's how are we framing defensive and offensive cybersecurity within those kind of contexts.
Okay, Andy, I've got a question for you, and I'm going to ask you a question from the floor. Actually, I'm sorry, I don't know who's asked the questions when they come into my device up here. They're anonymous, so I can't say who's asked these excellent questions, but there's lots of them, and keep them coming. Andy, how do we achieve herd immunity in cybersecurity? And as someone who's senior role at the Global Cyber Alliance, you're very well placed to explain exactly how we achieve herd immunity.
I assume that's people not cyber attacking cows, isn't it? You mean herd mentality, I guess. It's a really good question. And I guess arguably you could say don't come to conferences where everybody thinks in the same kind of way. So hopefully this kind of thing gives you all some kind of stimulus. I guess to pick up on the previous point and therefore to answer that question, I don't think enough competitors are sharing intelligence about cyber attacks. So we talked about public-private partnership, but if you're a global organisation, which public or which government do you go and actually talk to and associate with? So I think back to that point, we're hearing a lot about you should go and tell the police and law enforcement, which I agree with. If you want to avoid herd mentality, go talk to your competitors, which I know seems nuts, but there's an organisation just through there called the Cyber Defence Alliance, no relation to the Global Cyber Alliance. They're a bunch of banks. They all share intelligence because if somebody attacks Barclays, they're going to attack Santander and Lloyds using exactly the same technique. So although those guys compete in the financial marketplaces day by day, they've decided that cyber isn't a place to go and compete. Now, for me, avoidance of herd mentality, if you're going to communicate with your competitors, that's different thinking. And once you get into that different thinking, it opens up a whole new lines of inquiry. So I'd encourage everybody else who's a competitor to go and hug your competitors today and see what happens.
And it's the Global Cyber Alliance. How do you help in this? Because you're set up by more on the law enforcement side of things, and I think the police do work with the Cyber Defence Alliance.
Yeah,
but you're more on because you're set up by the city police and
we're on
the
prevention side. Yes. Yeah. So police and law enforcement have realised that just chasing criminals using conventional techniques and trying to arrest them within your jurisdiction just doesn't work within cybersecurity. So we're set up for prevention. So as a chief constable said to me fairly recently, putting lights in a street makes the crime in that street go down. So we're not for profit. We give away free cyber defence tools. Again, in the theory that if it costs £100 to go to your doctor or you can go there for free, you're more likely to embrace free things. So yeah, we're all about prevention is better than cure.
Okay. I've got a question here for you, Andersen. Quantum computing. How seriously should we take the threat of quantum computers? I'm guessing specifically with regards to cybersecurity.
Okay. Well, I'm going slightly off topic from whether we should present a united front. I started doing post-quantum protection back in 2009. I have to say we were way ahead of our time. People were all laughing at me and saying, oh, post-quantum. In fact, the name was actually haunting us. It's like, post-quantum, let's worry about it post-quantum. So, but no one's laughing anymore, especially in the government world and in the banking world. In the last 2-3 years, investors have pumped in billions of dollars into quantum computing. And now they have all concluded it's no longer a science problem, but an engineering problem. So now it's all talking about scaling, because in terms of all this entanglement, all this quantum stuff, people already have found several options to do it. And in terms of post-quantum protection, the landscape has changed because we know in the last 6 to 9 months, people have become very excited by it or worried by it, and we've got approaches from a number of governments in the world. They all want to see what we can do about it. So if we're talking about a united front in defending something, a future threat, that's actually happening. And in fact, this week, there's an IETF, it's sort of like open forum internet setting body for future standards. for VPNs, for TLS, and all the secure communications. So there's a one-week conference in London, and we're participating in that. And NIST, the US standard setting body, they have got a competition in post-quantum encryption as well. So now it seems like the whole world is uniting in working together on how to counter such threats. Just now, Stu was talking about systemic risks. To me, I think quantum is going to kill us all, because the entire internet we use today is based on something which is not quantum safe. So whoever's got the first quantum computer will actually conquer the world. They don't need weapons anymore. They don't need fighter jets anymore. All they need to do is from a basement, and they can crack all the encryption. They can go into the banks and or the government agencies and just suck out all the data very easily.
That's a pretty scary thought. Okay, just a question here. Maybe I could ask Ruth this. I think it's one up your street, potentially. What more could be done to coordinate education for businesses and consumers about cyber threats?
So this is, I think, a really good point, because particularly if you look at it from a consumer or an SME point of view, if you go online and you Google, advice about cybersecurity, there's a lot of stuff out there. But the majority of people do not go online and Google stuff about cybersecurity. So I think there's a real need to have very simple messages about securing your own security pushed into everyday life. For example, adverts on TV or the cinema. I mean, you'll have seen Barclays Bank, for example, doing a lot of adverts around cybersecurity. Very clear information on digital products, maybe on their packaging. When you buy a digital product, you very rarely get any simple information on the packaging saying this is what it's going to collect, this is what it's going to do with it. There isn't any of that, and in fact, government launched a report last week talking about how we need to have clearer, simple messages on consumer goods that are connected to the internet, because we're connecting more and more on there. So I think those would be sort of the key things I would advise, because although a lot of time and money and effort has gone into cybersecurity advice, and there is a lot of good stuff out there, it's just not getting through to people in the same way as if I'd said, have you do you remember the Don't Drink and Drive road campaign, or Kill Your Speed? People, that resonates with people, but not many people I poll will be aware of the latest cyber aware campaign. So I think we need to do a lot more about getting it out, the messaging out there into public consciousness.
Okay. I've got a question for Nigel as well, one of my own questions. I think you mentioned it in your opening remarks about GDPR. Yeah. I think a lot of people here will have GDPR on their minds and perhaps be working on specific projects, because the deadline for GDPR to come into force is approaching. And as you mentioned, there are potential fines for companies that have data stolen, their clients' data stolen, or get hacked. So it's a big issue. Can you just talk to us a bit about how this is going to work, particularly with relation to cybersecurity, and what you're seeing so far?
What we're seeing so far, I think one thing that GDPR, if you like, does a lot of good things from our point of view, certainly. But what we're actually seeing is companies are, because of GDPR, taking their cybersecurity a lot more serious. They've suddenly realized that there is a big danger to their company. And it's not just about the financial, it's not just about the fact that we actually will have the power to stop you from processing data as well. It's also about your reputational. The more you damage your reputation by not having good cybersecurity, and therefore you may end up flouting GDPR, you're going to be on the front page of an awful lot of newspapers. It's going to do a lot of reputational damage. So I think companies are starting to understand this, and they're starting to see it. And thankfully, they're starting to apply the cybersecurity tools and techniques that really they probably should have a long time ago. The Data Protection Act has been with us for nearly 20 years. GDPR is not a revolution, it's an evolution. Just continuing to move forward. If you've been guarding your data and doing it properly, then what GDPR wants of you is just a little bit more about the privacy by design, about being transparent, those types of things. So it fits in very closely, and I think it's helping raise the cybersecurity profile as well. It's letting companies know. I mean, we're certainly trying to push the SME angle at the moment. We've just started a very large campaign. We want them to be aware of GDPR, but part of that is also then hopefully they'll pick up on that cybersecurity angle, and they'll actually be able to start looking at protecting themselves. And that's really the important thing, is if on the back of GDPR, people then look at their cybersecurity and realise they're not where they need to be, not where they want to be, this is the time to do it. This is the time to draw that attention to them.
Okay, and you mentioned there that you're looking at SMEs and trying to help them prepare for GDPR. I mean, how much are you doing proactively? Are you going into companies and looking at their cybersecurity defences and testing that?
We're happy to talk to them. I mean, testing cybersecurity is not one of our remits, certainly. No. We've got advice lines there for people to ring and talk to us, different bits and pieces. We've got a very large ad campaign. Myself coming to things like this is to get that message out. I mean, basically, the bottom line is talk to us. If you're not sure, if you're still a bit wary about talking to us, which you shouldn't be, there are plenty of people like Andy. Talk to him. Find out what you need to do. Find out how easy it is to get yourself protected. And from there, suddenly GDPR isn't the big nasty thing that people think it is. It is, like I said earlier, it's about your citizens' rights. And if you can, as a company, protect data, protect those citizens' rights, you and me are never going to cross paths. But talk to the likes of Andy. Talk about protection.
I won't tell him. If you talk to me, I won't tell him you've called me, honest.
Not in the slightest.
If that helps.
Absolutely. Confidentiality.
Yeah.
Andy, maybe you could talk about this question. What do you see as the top 3 cybersecurity risks out there?
Well, okay. Well, I guess going all the way back to basics, and you talked about herd mentality. One of the things we do, a thing called DMARC, which is very techy, but feel free to Google it. It's so easy to send emails over the internet and pretend you're someone else. And actually 90% of the root causes of cybercrime is phishing, and you're more likely to click on a phishing link if it really looks like it's come from your bank. So phishing is always the thing. DMARC is one of the things to help to prevent that. So I think it's going to be phishing for quite a while. I think we all know the most popular password is still password 123. And I think if I said, hands up everybody who's turned on two-factor authentication on their iPhone in the audience. Actually, should we do that? Stick your hand up if you've turned two-factor authentication on. Okay, not so bad, but not everyone. So I think, identity, passwords, password protection, but phishing. If it's still 90% of cybercrime, and cybercrime in the UK is still running at 29 billion, and it's growing at double-digit growth still per annum, then phishing, email and phishing is always going to be the number 1, 2, and 3 for me.
Okay. Stuart, a question from the audience for you, specifically for you. Why should proxy forces which follow the money and work for foreign governments and institutions receive the same protection as those working on behalf of UK interests? I think that's a sort of follow-up to what you were saying in your opening remarks.
I suppose no good reason. My counter is, why should I work for you then? I'll just work for the private sector. I suppose the point that I'm trying to drag out there is a lot of the time you're seeing these I don't consider myself proxy actor, and I don't consider private sector Western organisations as proxy actors. They're private sector organisations, but my point was they can be construed as proxy actors. I think what this draws out is, the so-called fifth domain cyberspace. If you look at that as a theatre of conflict, a lot of the time you're asking private sector organisations to do what public sector organisations would really do, and that will be their mandate in that kind of space. I think that's the case in security as well, where you are looking at, the classic is nation-state intrusion into an organisation's network, and you go and do that response case inside that kind of company. That exposes you to risk. Of course, you know that when you get on the plane, when you go out there and do that. So I think there's a danger that you could get abandonment. So people simply say, actually, and when I know this, I know people who've said, actually, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up to remove malware from a computer, not get involved in this very increasingly high risk activity here. I think it's my response.
Okay. I just want to ask, maybe Ruth again, do you think that regulators and law enforcement, and we've got regulators and representatives of law enforcement here as well, do you think they're doing enough to help big companies see off this challenge, this cybersecurity challenge?
Well, I think to see off, as a BT, we see ourselves as responsible for defending our network and our customers. It's primarily our responsibility, not the regulators and not law enforcement's. You could say it's their responsibility to work with us, and we do work very closely, both with regulators and with policymakers as they draw up regulation, and also with law enforcement as well. We work very closely with the NCA, particularly on helping to track down DDoS infrastructure that's run by criminal groups. And we'd also make sure that we work very closely with government in terms of the development of regulation. There's a lot of regulation that's hitting us at the moment. We've got obviously GDPR coming in. There's the Network Information and Security Directive coming into the big critical infrastructure companies from Europe this year as well. And then we've got the European Union is consulting on further measures for cybersecurity certifications for products and services sold on the EU market. So there is a lot of activity. I would say that I think we work pretty well together given the circumstances, and that there is a lot of resource and time employed there. I think the big challenge for us as private sector, as public sector, and working together is being able to maximize our resource against a threat which is gathering pace. So we saw a 57% increase in the number of attacks against BT last year. At the same time, we're all, many organizations such as ourselves are taking advantage of the great opportunities we have from digital technologies like cloud and IoT, and that's completely right, and a strong security approach can help us to do that, but it does give us a more complex digital environment to work in. So I certainly think there's a lot of effort and resource going in, but it's about how we can maximize that, I think, and maximize our effect, and that will be the big challenge for us.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of messages saying time's up, but I think we started about 15 minutes late, so I'm gonna plow on for at least another 5 minutes. They're still getting lots of questions. I think there's a lot of interest in this, and quite a few very practical questions. And if I can maybe just ask, there's a question here about blockchain, which is something I write also quite a lot about. Maybe ask you, Andersen. The question is, will we get more secure if we collaborate to put customer identity on the blockchain?
Okay. Do you guys want to know the real answer or the...
Yeah, we want to know the truth. Okay. It's okay, just hit us.
Because I went on an open forum 2 years ago. I said blockchain had absolutely no security. People were trying to silence me. But now, if you read in the press, people are now saying, oh yeah, it really doesn't have much security. Blockchain gives you immutability, which is not security. If you understand what I'm saying, it's like me printing all the newspapers, and everyone has a copy in the world, 1 million copies, no one can alter the headline. But before it goes into the print, if I've altered the headline, I have hacked into the editor's machine and so on, that's immutable. Everyone's got the wrong headline. So that's blockchain for you. So whoever's been telling you blockchain is security doesn't know what they're talking about. However, there's been a lot of collaboration on blockchain because now everyone talks about it. And there are several aspects you have to consider very carefully. It's wonderful if it's used in a trustless environment and also in a heterogeneous environment. What I mean is, if it's a stock exchange, with member firms settling their trades, you don't need blockchain. But if it's a supply chain in the world between the shipper and the container provider and the insurance company and the bank issuing the letter of credit, then blockchain is wonderful for it. And this is the kind of collaboration you need across industries in order to make it end-to-end secure. I'm very passionate about this. So
in that case, in the trade finance and
that's totally usable. Identity is also usable
and secure.
Well, again, it really depends. Everyone talks about this majority voting. How many people have actually read the Ethereum protocol papers and the blockchain Bitcoin paper word for word? My team has. I can tell you it's not a 50% vote. It's much less than that. It's so tiny that it's frightening. If the whole world knows it's only a number of people who can vote against it. However, if you alter certain parameters, then you can still make it usable. Yeah. But supply chain, trade finance, identity, these are all usable, but it's not in the way that a lot of people have been talking about.
Okay. Got another question on identity, and I think the best person for this is probably time's up. Apparently, I'm ploughing on. Nigel, the question here from Joseph. Thank you, Joseph, for this question and for putting your name on it. What's the panel's opinion on government-assured digital identity as a mechanism for citizens improving our cybersecurity online? It's a gov.uk verify, is apparently the thing.
I've not looked into the details behind it.
Maybe you're not the right person.
Maybe, Andy?
Well, I have, and
Okay.
and I think it's a good thing. Basically, based on if there's actually somebody doing something to give the nation two-factor authentication, that's got to be better than single-factor authentication. Back to my previous point, if everybody's password is password, that makes it easy for a hacker. So Verify and lots of other identity solutions out there is a good two-factor authentication solution. So others are available, and as Liam Maxwell said, other governments are doing similar things, and I know we spoke with the Australian government when the Verify project was around. So it's a good example of the UK government saying single password is no good, let's go and do something else. And I guess from a government point of view, I think there's about 800 government websites. So for everyone to have a different username and password, you're going to forget your password, you're going to click on email. What did I say about email? It's really easy to intercept and spoof. So as soon as you do that, you've increased the risk of a bad man getting in there. So, or woman, indeed, from a gender diversity point of view. So anything that means that you can use one secure identity and use it once and then maintain that identity, because loads of people have probably got a password book at home with 800 passwords in it. That's not good cybersecurity. So Verify, the spirit of Verify is to address those solutions. So I applaud the UK government for taking that high ground.
We have, as a country, been a bit resistant to the idea of identity schemes, national identity schemes, for privacy reasons, but maybe the time has come to rethink that. Yes, Stuart.
I think just to add to that point, it's not my analogy, but it's a US Air Force analogy. And they actually talked about the ocean and the analogy of cybersecurity in the ocean. They said, actually, your chance of providing security for the ocean is zero. What you can do is provide security for harbours, atolls and areas within that ocean as well. And so you can apply this to cybersecurity as well. So, do I want my kids to be safe when they're looking at videos on YouTube? Yes, of course I do. Who's not interested in that? Do I want a record of my porn browsing habits? Absolutely not. And those are the two examples of that. So I think, yes, I think digital identity is a good idea, but equally people's identity to have no identity is something we should respect as well. Otherwise, people will innovate other parts of the internet, other forms of connection where they can be, and you can see this in technological innovation.
Okay, I think we really have run out of time, I'm afraid, but thank you very much for listening, and all it remains to do is to thank our excellent panel in the traditional way. So thank you, Andersen, Andy, Nigel, Ruth, and Stuart. Thanks very much. It was fascinating.